Hey there, Internet. My name's Luxander, and today we're going to talk about my specific gender label. It's quarantine, and I look like crap. Anyway, recently I was in a stream chat while watching a streamer who was asked about the term genderqueer. It somehow came up during conversation, and the streamer who I was watching was like, I don't think that's a gender. And I was like, no, I need to talk about this because my gender is genderqueer. And so I just wanted to talk about what that means to me, what my sort of general approach is to labels, I guess, and just sort of educating about one of the specific non-binary genders. I don't know what the fuck I'm doing, guys. I'm sorry. Essentially, my gender labels kind of have like here's a broad one, and then here's another one underneath there, and then here's another one underneath there, and then there's like a more specific one down there that's the actual one. So when I'm talking about my gender to someone, a lot of the time I will just say I'm trans and leave it at that, because I do feel that the term trans, short for transgender, is typically how I use it and how it's just generally used in the community. I consider myself trans on the simplest level because I am not the same gender that I was assigned at birth, and I have socially and medically transitioned, so it seems to me that the term trans is a good, very broad descriptor of just sort of my life general journey, sort of. Under the broader umbrella of trans, I call myself non-binary, and again, when I say I'm non-binary, that is pretty much as meaningful and meaningless as it is when I say I'm trans. When I say I'm non-binary, I'm not communicating what my actual gender is. I'm communicating what my relationship to gender is. So I'm saying, like, I am non-binary. I am in that group of people for whom it does not work to try to cavort about their lives in a binary fashion. So I am trans up top, and then I am non-binary within the context of being trans. And I make the distinction because some people who are non-binary identified don't also consider themselves to be trans. And I think that for the most part, that's just because these are people who don't feel the need to transition in a major way. So they can feel many times that calling themselves trans is like co-opting a label and experience that is not for them to do, which I understand because I myself felt more comfortable calling myself trans once I started hormones. It's just like, I don't mean to inflict that on anyone, and I don't even believe it about myself. It's just like doubt from everywhere else seeps into your brain. So personally, that's the distinction that I sort of see with non-binary people who don't also identify as trans. My definition of transgender includes them, but if they don't want to call themselves trans, I'm not going to force that on anybody. But I think for the most part, it's just insecurity. Anyway, that is not the topic of this video. Anyway, broadly, non-binary just means you've given me these options, these two options, and I say no to both of them. Very, very broad term. My next umbrella label under non-binary, I think, is where it would go, is transmasculine. I identify as transmasculine because I don't identify as a trans man, but I have had a medical journey and a social journey that is very similar to trans men, and a lot of the time I can sort of map my experience onto them because there's not very much representation of people who are trans but aren't specifically going from one hard binary to another hard binary. So I relate a lot to trans men, and there are times when I will call myself a trans guy because I feel that guy is a little bit more loose of a term. It's not pinning you down as like you identify as a man. So that is, I consider myself transmasculine. Specifically, transmasculine means I am a trans person who was assigned female at birth, and I am transitioning to be more masculine. This term also doesn't always work for non-binary AFAB people because Sometimes they might not want to transition to being masculine. Sometimes they identify as maybe agender, non-gender, or but don't feel like changing their presentation very much. So that would not apply in that case. The word transmasculine. Just acknowledging that it doesn't work for everybody, but it does accurately describe me because I am trans and I am on the masculine end of the spectrum, starting from that position of being assigned female at birth. But transmasculine is not typically used as a gender label. It is used as a descriptor, again, of your relationship to gender. You're moving towards the masculine side, transmasculine. Again, an umbrella term, can be used to describe trans men sometimes, but typically is used to describe people like me, who are non-binary but are transitioning in a similar way. And then we come to the quintessential gender label. It's genderqueer. I'm genderqueer. Genderqueer is a term that is, so it's very strange for me to be using this as the specific label for my gender, because the word genderqueer is also kind of nebulous and meaningless in the same way that calling myself non-binary is. Similarly, not exactly the same. The term genderqueer has been used to describe people's gender nonconformity. I do not identify as gender nonconforming. I am trans, not GNC. But the term genderqueer has been used to describe gender expression in the past. I personally use it as my primary gender label because when I was a teenager and figuring out that I was trans, I was really dialed in to the detail of, oh, do I feel like a boy today? Do I feel like a girl today? I was really, really focused on it and keeping journals of how I felt in terms of like, do I feel like a boy? Do I feel like a girl? Which, if you're not trans, makes no sense. But I'm sorry, that's just how it is. You just like, oh, like today I feel like this. And I got really tired of that because I felt like so much pressure to exactly quantify my gendered feelings on a day-to-day basis. Like, it felt so like unhealthy and obsessive to me. So that I also am the wrong person to come to ask, like, I feel like this. What is my gender label? Because I'm going to give you broad answers. I'm going to tell you that it is not worth your time to freak out about it all the time. If you can come up with a label that accurately explains to other people and that you feel comfortable identifying as, that's all you need. If you communicate the broad idea to someone, like, again, if I don't need to get into further detail, I will just say I'm trans. If it's related to the conversation, I will say I'm transmasculine. My quintessential gender label doesn't really come up that often, which is why I felt the need to make a video about it. When I was a teenager figuring this out, I think that there was some sense that I had a fluidity to my gender, but after a little bit of time, I realized that I just experience gender in a really fluxy way. Like, my experience of gender is just super nebulous and weird, and I just allowed myself to let go of the need to quantify my feelings on a day-to-day basis. I just let go of the idea that, like, a gender fluid person in my head at the time was someone who, like, would come to school or work with a different gender presentation every few days and, like, wanted to be called by either he or she pronouns depending on their expression. Like, that was at the time, that was my representation and understanding of gender fluid people at the time. I knew a gender fluid person at that time, so there was only one representation for me. We're talking like 2009, it was a while ago. I call myself genderqueer because it doesn't hold me to any standard of expected behavior. If me saying I'm genderqueer functionally communicates nothing, and at the same time it communicates a whole lot, because my experience with gender is weird and it varies, and I want to be able to do whatever I want in terms of expressing my gender or expressing myself, whatever, without any kind of limitations or expectations, I guess. Like, I understand that you can be a man and you can be a woman and behave however you want and dress however you want. I just personally feel a lot of pressure about social roles. Like, I am aware of a lot of the pressure of social roles. So part of my experience with my gender has been like wildly bucking the concept of gender at all. Like the idea that I have to be constrained. Like, I feel as a non-binary person that if I want to put on a slammin' dress and have one of my friends who knows how to do makeup do my makeup, because I don't fucking know how to do it, then I can do that, and it is not a reflection that I'm actually cis. And equally, like, the fact that I dress like this in casual t-shirts and cargo pants all the time does not mean that I am a man. Like, I can do whatever I want with my gender expression because I'm approaching it from a standpoint of, like, I'm non-binary. Literally everything I do is drag, basically. Not that I like drag in performativity. That's a whole other... Listen, cis gays are the worst. Anyway, the point is that I just got so caught up in this idea that you were supposed to have, like, a really specific gender label and, like, that it needed to be thorough. I would see people with long explanations of their gender that just felt cloistering to me. And again, whatever you need to do to feel comfortable in your own gender, that's fine. I'm just, like, not the person to ask for advice, is all I'm trying to say. Like, I just got so tired of that feeling. It was just that feeling like I had to, again, like I was just need to quantify it and be consistent, you know? Like, ugh, I hate that. So I identify as genderqueer because my relationship to gender is queer. It just fucking is. And because I felt like it freed me up to actually explore instead of being concerned over micromanage, how do I feel, what does that mean. It actually freed me from that need to quantify everything and just let me be like, listen, everything I do is queer because it just fucking is. And, like, I find it so funny that it took me such a long time to have the same thing with my sexual orientation label. I made a video, a while back called Bisexual versus Pansexual. What's the difference? Ding ding. And it's one of my videos that people consistently come to. And by the end of that video, I was like, oh yeah, I'm omnisexual. That's the term specifically that actually describes what's going on. But then I immediately felt like erasure because pansexual and bisexual would be talked about, but omnisexual didn't. And it took me like less than a week of that before I was like, you know what? Fuck this. I give up completely on, like, listen, I'm queer. That is my gender label is genderqueer, and my sexual label is queer. I do not have to justify myself at all. To anyone. And that's just my personal journey with this. Like, 10 years ago, I just decided that I was going to stop micromanaging and about my gender, and it took me 10 years later to do the same thing with my sexual orientation label. So anyway, I just wanted to talk about this and sort of describe my gender journey, sort of. I initially thought that I was a trans man, by the way. Anybody who tells you that being non-binary is a phase, because of the available information at the time, I had weird gender feels, and the only available option, I thought, was to be a trans man. So that happened for a while, and then I learned about non-binary gender and was like, oh, that's it. And another part of the reason why I identify as genderqueer specifically is that 10 years ago, genderqueer sort of was an umbrella term. We didn't call people non-binary at the time. That just wasn't the term that was available in the common lexicon. Genderqueer was sort of one of the first labels I really discovered that wasn't a binary label of some kind, you know? Like, and I just was immediately so relieved and freed up because all of a sudden it was like, oh, there's a label. I can just have that and start from that framework and move forward in my life from there. So that's why I'm genderqueer. Anyhow, sorry for not posting at all in May. It was the end of school. Aside from that, I don't really have a whole lot of excuses, but I'm done with school now, and all I have to do is take a test for licensing, and then I am done with school stuff for a while. So yeah, thank you all for watching. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. I will be answering as many as I can. Whoops, excuse me. But that's going to be all from me today. If you like this video, please give me pretty analytics to look at and comments to read. Find me on Patreon. You could tip me on PayPal. You could subscribe to the channel. You could ring the bell, because I don't post regularly anymore. And have an okay day. Bye. Considering that I didn't do this at all for the month of May, I'm going to take a little extra time at the end of this video to thank my patrons. So the scroll bar will be going a little bit slower so that you can see all of their lovely names. Anyhow, my biggest thanks goes to Tina M, R. Halverson, Sarah A, Elis Stewart, Wellington Marcus, Athiet, Amanda B, Elizabeth Bartell, Eileen McCall, Rosa Bovett Showing Up, and Mr.